Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and we're back with another exciting one, which is the better investment value, Fuxuan versus Aventurine. Now, this is a really tough one, so I hope you guys have put it in the background, really listen, and not to worry if any of you just listening in the background. This is something that we do every single patch, and as always, I promise that you can listen in the background. At the same time, I'll narrate everything on screen, while I'll also be unbiased throughout the video. I'll give you my honest, logical explanation of what I think is better in which category. And if you care about my own personal opinion, own personal bias and stuff like that, I'll leave it all the way at the end of the video as always. But first things first, we don't waste any time on this channel. So let's jump right in with number 1, current value. Now the first and easiest thing to talk about is their style of protecting your team because they are preservation characters. Aventurine blocks damage. Fuxuan mitigates damage. Now the first question a lot of people will be asking is, which is better? Is blocking or mitigating better? If you talk about current value in the current game state where you have meta characters like Jingliu, the obvious answer to that is actually blocking the damage with Aventurine's thick shield is much better than mitigating damage with Fuxuan. For those of you who have these two limited characters, Fuxuan and Jingliu, you will understand what I mean. You try to play them in the same team, or your whole team is left with a 100 HP as Jingliu saps your entire team. So it's the same for any character who wants to play generally at low life, like Arlen for example. If you play with a thick shield, at least you won't be afraid of him dying if you even play him at all. And of course, Fuxuan on the other hand might not be super good with a character like Arlen. But then of course there are certain situations where HP sapping characters might also still benefit from this, and that will be an instance of a character like Blade. Blade will much rather take damage and want to take damage, so she will definitely work better with a character like Fuxuan, whereas a character that doesn't want to take damage at all, like Yanqing, avoids damage. So there are, you can see a flip side, pros and cons. There is no clear winner in this blocking or mitigating damage category, but overall you will feel much safer being protected by a massive shield than Fuxuan's mitigation of damage in playstyle. It's not very easy for people to get a vibe to it as of yet. So that is for my comparison between the first part on just majority of what they do. Now second thing is, what are their best teams and who outperforms? Both of them fulfill very different best teams, and at the same time they can fill many different rosters because they are preservation units. They offer a lot. They do huge shielding. Aventurine does a lot of damage on the side, so if you're looking for additional damage, he has that. Fuxuan has some damage in her burst here and there, but more often than not, she's going to help you mitigate tons of damage. Why is Fuxuan super good? If you are a person that likes Silver Wolf, you like the playstyle of dropping weakness in the enemy, and you like quantum characters, quantum teams in general, Fuxuan is going to be very strong. One reason why is because, for example, I'm just going to pull up some quantum characters here, but there are of course a lot like Qingque, you have Xue, etc. And if you see this character here, this current unit, and for example you have Sparkle buffing the team and whatnot, why quantum teams are so strong and everyone keeps talking about quantum teams rather than other mono teams is because of Silver Wolf in the game. She is able to drop a quantum weakness into the enemy 100% of the time if you're playing into a quantum team, which means that you can tackle almost any single content if you put a quantum character, 4 quantum units together. Together with Sparkle, Fuxuan, you pretty much secured, but granted it is a bit of an expensive team if I'll be honest. But that's why a lot of people are pulling Fuxuan and why she has remained relevant in the meta until Silver Wolf condition is nerfed, or maybe there are other people that can do it. We have other elemental Silver Wolves, then Fuxuan's value likely will decrease slightly, but not by too much too. On the flip side, let's look at Aventurine's side of things. When does Aventurine outperform? If you are a player who really likes, for example, Dr. Ratio, you like follow-up teams, you like Topaz and Nambi, these are characters that you are aiming for, characters that you want to get, and you want a defensive character that offers you a very offensive role, I think this unit will definitely be much more higher in terms of investment value currently compared to Fuxuan. If you play a lot of follow-up attackings, if you can fit him into the team, you don't really have too many options in follow-up teams if you're playing with Topaz and Nambi currently. The only other defensive character that does follow-up attacks, if my memory doesn't fail me, is probably March 7, which is not too much of that. I guess Clara you could consider is also a defensive character at times, but really is compared to March 7, and March 7 doesn't offer too much damage. So I think that's where Aventurine shines in terms of the current game state, current value that he offers. If I were to be honestly giving you one of my gripes about Aventurine in the current state, is his element. I do not understand why Hoiverse had to make him imaginary, because if you think about the theory or or just the idea of what imaginary characters want to be, when you weakness break an imaginary enemy, you are slowing them down. Think of like a character like Welt. If you are slowing them down and you are preservation, you kind of contradict yourself, because that if you slow the enemies, you won't even need to take damage in the first place, which means all their offensiveness, their ability to break enemies imaginary, it kind of like contradicts that shield that that thick shield that he puts up. So I'd much rather him, for example, with fire or preservation, but that's just my thoughts on the element as well. Now at this stage, rather than just comparing purely on the current value, I think it's very important to talk about another thing, which is alternatives, and we'll talk about like CC resistance and stuff like that in a little bit too. Alternatives to both of them. They are healers in general, so they will compete naturally, or they are defensive units, protectors, not healers, I used the wrong word, but they compete generally with most other preservation abundance characters. To tell you the truth, the one that they probably compete the most with is the other 5-star limiteds, Harmony limiteds, or Abundance limiteds rather, which is Ho Ho as well as Luo Ta. We talked about them in the other videos already, so I'm not going to go in depth, but basically anyone that sustains, anyone that protects, they are strong competitors. Where they stand out or they outperform is, as mentioned in the current value section, that's where they truly shine against the other defensive units in the game right now. Now I want to talk about another thing, which is alternatives in terms of what they do. If you are talking about a character who's able to buff or like play into follow-up teams, he really has very few. Aventurine has very few alternatives that does what he does. So the only thing that you can think about when you're having like alternatives is probably who can build a thick massive shield like Aventurine. And that's probably a standard 5-star character like Jett, who any of you can pick him up in the shop if you wanted to, after you get like 300 standard pools and stuff like that. So he is probably the best alternative to Aventurine. He does a lot of what Aventurine does. Instead of damage, he does a lot more crowd control and freezing the enemies as well, which is again a bit counterintuitive because you don't use that thick massive shield if your enemies don't act at all. You want them to actually take some damage, which is why I want to bring in a second competitive character, which is Gallagher. I think Gallagher being introduced into the game is another way of playing the defensive role. Aventurine is slightly more offensive, a defensive character. So many double negatives, do you call that? But yeah, Gallagher is also a character that is a defensive unit, but is meant to do a lot of fire break damage, offensive kit. I like his element, I like what he does. Gallagher makes more sense to me. I just wish they make Aventurine a bit more offensive of an element, so you could even play him like break effect or something that scales very nicely. So these are some of the realistic competitors to Aventurine. For Fuxuan, I don't think there's really any true competitor right now in the game for damage mitigation and what she does. She is in a different class of her own in terms of a character. It's very difficult to find all of that. The closest example that you can think of is a character like Lynx, who can be replaced in a mono quantum team, but then again, Lynx might not offer you the same level of protection that Fuxuan offers, especially in harder fights. Most people went into the Swarm Disaster and who pulled Fuxuan after found it very easy clearing the Swarm Disaster. I had a tremendously hard time without her in the first few cycles, but that just shows how Fuxuan is really great for handling very difficult content compared to other competitors like Lynx. And that is my honest take on alternatives. I think between the two of them, Fuxuan has much lesser alternatives. Her kit just does way too much for too little, and Aventurine again has some competition. And one of them is a new character as well, so there is a bit of uncertainty in terms of value. But thankfully, Gallagher is coming out in the first half. We can see how an offensive defensive unit performs before we make a bigger judgment. And right now, before we go into like future value and stuff like that, I want to talk about something else that not many people, or maybe a few of you watching this video are like wondering, when am I going to say it? When am I going to say it? And that is the crowd control resistance. One of the benefits of abundance characters, for example, like Ho Ho, like Luo Ta, like Lynx, Natasha, etc., is their ability to cleanse. And there are many alternatives in the game to cleanse, but at the end of the day, I want you guys to realize that when you are playing a defensive unit, you will want someone that is reliable, someone that is able to stop your teammates from getting CC'd. There's no use having a massive shield, massive damage mitigation. If all your teammates are all like crowd control, you can't even do any damage at all. You will feel very upset about your team because there's no damage coming out even though you have the huge massive shield. In this sense, I do think that the crowd control resistance that Fuxuan offers in a kit using a skill significantly outperforms a character like Aventurine, as that means that the ability to block that CC is basically a pseudo cleanse in a sense. Again, prevention is better than cure. That CC protection is a protection.
It blocks one's instance every time you press that skill, her skill ability, whereas cleansing you still have to wait for your turn order and whatnot. So I think that Fuxuan is much stronger in that aspect. Granted, Aventurine is not useless in this aspect. He still does like effect rest increase, but of course it's an RNG chance. Effect rest is still subjected to RNG and it's much easier to be is subjected to power creep over time, because as enemy effectiveness hit rate increases over time, the monsters get stronger, which means all of these variables that are not guaranteed will become less and less effective over time too. So that is my thoughts between the current state of things between both of them. But as you can see here, they are pretty much tight between both of them. They play to different strengths. They are going to be very competitive. But now let's look at something which is much more fun, which is the future impact of these two characters. Currently, we both know, yeah, they can probably play into the meta quite well. Both of them are very strong, but what about future implications? Who is actually going to scale better? I would argue, firstly, that any follow-up team member, for example, like IPC members, maybe if they're planning to play in a thematic, I don't know whether 2 is considered a trend right now. We have Topaz and Nambi, we have Aventurine, and they want to go into like that 10 Stone Hearts lore thing. If they all play in the follow-ups, I think Aventurine is in a very, very good place that's like supporting him behind with lore trends boosting him, such that he's able to like climb even further with that. On the flip side, Fuxuan doesn't have any of that thematic lore, that incentive that Hoyoverse wants to build like factions. ProffessorWaffle is like kinda done for now. Maybe they will improve like with another arc, but I don't think that they will specifically make characters just to synergize and synchronize with Fuxuan's kit. She feels more of like a standalone, so you don't get that pump from the IPC kind of pump that Aventurine gets. So that's one of the good upsides about Aventurine. We already talked about other characters that it works well, follow-up, anything to do with like follow-up, synergies, he plays with that. He's one of the rare characters that has that as well in his overall kit. If you get maybe a character in future, for example, like an imaginary Silver Wolf, if they want to sell it that way, then definitely that's like Aventurine stonks as well, because he gets the same benefits as Fuxuan. But for now, and I want to switch to the flip side of Fuxuan for now, any quantum character that comes out will benefit Fuxuan. You will likely be playing that. If the meta shifts into a quantum element, if the meta shifts into a Zealer, into a Xue, a Qingque element, you have Sparkle already now in the game, which is a very, very strong 5-star quantum harmony unit as well. One of the only factions with 5-star harmony. For now, we only have like Ice, we have Quantum, and we have upcoming Robin, which is going to be physical, and of course Bronya Wind. We don't have one for imaginary yet, so that's like one way Aventurine can get even stronger. Silver Wolf is one of the reasons why I think Fuxuan is still going to remain relevant and high usage. They just clear so much content with very little resources. If you don't even think about slapping like Sparkle in, you play 2 limited characters like Fuxuan, Silver Wolf, and you slap in a Qingque, for example, and then your second last slot is like whoever else you're playing, maybe a 4-star unit or so. You are basically almost guaranteed to land a quantum weakness with 2 limited characters, and you can tackle almost any single content. This team is very difficult to be inefficient in, because you can tackle every single thing, which is why I think it's like super strong. Moving forward, I think it will still be stronger. It will get even stronger, especially if it rotates back into a quantum meta, if it rotates back into a Zealer meta, or any new quantum erudition 5-star characters comes out in future. So far, we haven't heard any information about that, but that is one thing that I'll be looking out on as well. So the second thing I want to talk about is when the meta shifts. Once your meta starts shifting into more crowd control, if you realize all the monsters now in Panacony, very few of them actually do true crowd control. Back then, before we had Kafka boss that was able to like entangle you and stuff like that, you had Savarok who was able to entangle, and other monsters that can CC, like those ProffessorWaffle monsters. If that is the case, we're moving back into a crowd control meta. Fuxuan is going to be a lot more comfortable to play. You want that reliability that she offers, whereas Aventurine will struggle once the CCs come back into the game, and damage, you'll realize you'll rather just not do that damage, instead mitigate so your damage dealers can dish out a lot more of that as well. And of course, now that we talked about a bit about future value, I want to talk about something a little bit more subjective, and that is potential. In this category, I think it's talking about things that are not game related. It's more of like Hoyoverse trends. Usually when we talk about this is whether we see anything that's going to happen in the future and what they are planning to do. This is of course a bit more subjective. I think that in terms of prediction, Fuxuan is a very difficult character to power creep overall. Damage mitigation is very difficult to counteract, but shielding is very easy to block. If let's say you were a game developer and you wanted to nerf a shield, How do you do that? Very simply, you just introduce a monster that has penetration. You penetrate through shields. We have that in a lot of other turn-based games. You have the ability to strip your enemy's shields, which is something very, very likely that can happen as well. So your huge chunky shield, totally gone. Penetration of shields and stuff like that. So the shield can work against him, and it's very easy for Hoyoverse to see if Aventurine is getting 2 stonks, let's just introduce something like that and swap him out. But if you talk about the flip side, how do you power creep Fuxuan? There is really no exact way that you can, because her matrix of prescience, the thing that does the damage mitigation, cannot be cleansed. It's not a buff that's on your character, it's a feel-like ability. Some of you have rightfully observed, even when something upon death destroys and captures Fuxuan, for example, the feel still stays on, which is ridiculously strong, and it prevents that kind of offensive attack from Hoyoverse trying to mitigate these characters. So if you think about that, from a developer point of view, it's very difficult to power creep a character like Fuxuan. You cannot make the numbers too big. If not, your other squishy characters here will all just like die, and then they'll fade off into utility and stuff like that. So you're only left with massive shielders left in the game that has a huge amount of effective HP. At the same time, Fuxuan's ability to mitigate damage does exactly what Aventurine does. It increases your whole team's HP as well. She has a HP buff in the kit, she has crit rate buff in the kit. Of course, Aventurine has like huge shielding and gives effect rest and also some crit damage buff on a target that is affected by unnerve and whatnot. But at the same time, truth to be honest, I think it's very, very difficult for Fuxuan to be power creep in the long run. Game developers will struggle with this character, which is why I said that she was quite overpowered back then. It's just as a game theorist or a person that tries to power, if let's say you want to try a power creep game, you can't really do much options for Fuxuan to make her less relevant other than breaking the whole game in the first place. Next up, and which is really the last section before we go into our final bias thoughts section, free-to-play kit. I think the free-to-play kit is very, very important, and between the two of them, I would say the easier character to farm is Aventurine. Fuxuan is not very friendly for super new characters, but her banner isn't around right now, so probably any of you watching this video playing the game would likely have quite a bit of farm by the time you get to her first banner. So why isn't Fuxuan very good? For those people who's first pulled on her banner, the way you veterans when she first came out, you'll realize that she requires a lot. You need a lot of HP gear to get her popping. You do need some kind of tracers on her, some damage reduction, and you do need a team that is relatively well built because she compounds upon that. A weak built characters will have very, very low effective HP to begin with, so mitigating nothing basically is still nothing, if you know what I mean. When you have very little HP, there's no amount of Fuxuan that can do that. But if you are a super new player, brand new, all your characters have less than 2k HP in general, you will feel a huge massive gain with Aventurine because his stick shield is very, very protective. If you're a new player into the game, you will feel he's way easier to build. Also because if you look at all the free-to-play preservation light cones in the game, I think 70% of them have something to do with buffing defense or scaling off of defense. The rest of them are not that good. Thankfully, Fuxuan still works with some of the free-to-play ones. She works very well with a 4-star one. In fact, I use the 4-star light cone, Landau's choice, for the damage mitigation on her. I think that's super good. And other than that, gear, defense, you have tons of it, right? You probably have some god tier crit rate, crit damage gear. You can just slap it on Aventurine, going to be very, very easy to build. Fuxuan, on the other hand, is a bit more specialist. There are some flexible builds where you can run both HP and defense depending on what you want, but she does prefer a little bit more HP than other gear. Both of them quite useful in terms of using very different gear from your overall characters. They don't really need their E1 either. They're purely functional without E0, S0. I think they work fine. But anyways, that's the logical thought process of everything. And now the exciting part, let's come to my own personal bias. Now this section of course is subjective, it's up to everyone's taste. Some people like Aventurine, he thinks it's very cool. Some people like Fuxuan. Personally, I don't think any of these designs suit my personal liking. I rather if they have a Kafka defensive character or anything. But in terms of investment value, my personal bias will be, I see the benefits of Aventurine scaling well into IPC into the future. But at the same time, the thing that irks me about him is not only his imaginary element, but also the fact that he doesn't have a guaranteed CC block. If the day comes where you need to play, for example, a Lynx together with him just to remove enemy CC, then I will argue that you might as well have not chose an offensive defensive unit like Aventurine in the first place. You much rather go with a character that like Luota, for example, who is able to cleanse a lot of debuffs and instead focus down on your main DPS. If you think about from that perspective, I think my choice here is very clear. I'll take Fuxuan, and Fuxuan without a doubt, because of she's very difficult to power creep, very difficult to get rid of her. And if you even play Silver Wolf or you want to pull Silver Wolf, I think a mono quantum team is too strong. And that's my own personal bias. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, there is no right or there's no wrong. So yeah, let me know what you think, and see you in the next video.